especially in the agriculture sector, because that directly impacts on the local producers. So we identified 3 critical areas that we felt had to be acted on, not just one.
Mr. Ryder, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I think we also shouldn't overlook the synergy between areas like agriculture, tourism, mining, or manufacturing. They actually, they're organically connected. So, for example, tourism can generate quite substantial demand for agricultural products, especially in those areas where where the communities have difficulty accessing the normal market type environment. So I'm thinking of communities that can get engaged, as agricultural communities that can have new markets for products that they can put into the tourism supply chain, for example. So I think that's a very important dimension that we shouldn't lose sight of. And in fact, and I know that in the tourism development framework, when we talk about inclusive growth, we have a number of programs, some of them funded by USAID, to address exactly those kind of dimensions and the connectivity.
I saw a few people raising their hands. Gentleman over there in the center.
I'm Norberto Kwong of Santra International. My question is addressed to the manufacturing sector. You see, 20 years ago, the joke is God created the world, but everything is made in China. So this the importance of manufacturing. And China is now becoming the number 2 world economic power. My question is addressed to Mr. Robert Batumbakal. Is ownership of land important to invite the foreigners to locate their plant in the Philippines and to let their personnel to own residential lots also?
Thank you. Excellent question. First, the point on China. It is true that China is becoming the largest manufacturer, if not the largest manufacturer. However, recent trends also show that there are opportunities for other countries now as they mature, as China matures and cost rises. You will be interested to know that labor cost in the Philippines in the last few years has been rising by only an average of 4%, whereas other countries are growing by double digits. Okay. On the second question of land ownership, this varies depending on different manufacturers. But in my opinion, what is really important for manufacturers is access to land, not necessarily ownership. By the way, in the Philippines, manufacturing, you're allowed to have 100% equity ownership. Okay? It's pretty unrestricted, except for land. So at least in my case, I do believe that access and security to land ownership or rent to long-term lease is more critical than actually owning it.
Gentleman in the brown suit.
Yes, again, Volker Steigerwald from German International Corporation. This question goes to Dr. Paris. In your excellent presentation, I saw one of the indices of competitiveness, which actually earlier I saw also with Bill, unfortunately he's not here now, that is the Global Innovation Index. And there the Philippines actually made not so good. We really went back. And I guess that's really something that we should very be concerned about. So maybe that's something that also for this group should be more discussion. How can we improve the innovation system of the Philippines here in this country?
Just want to add one emphasis I should have maybe placed a bit more on the presentation. I think all of this, innovation, all of these aspects, I was trying to bring out a theme that the premium for better institutions, property rights, but also human capital investment about like skills acquisition is going to be the critical to create the jobs and also to, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's services, all of these things. Because the world is changing, the technologies are changing. So, I mean, the importance of property rights, investment, human capital, especially the skills aspect, I think this is what we need to emphasize there a lot. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Attorney Dulce Punsalan. I'm a member of MAP, Women Business Council, and Gawad Kalinga. I'd like to address this question first to Mr. Joquino on the agribusiness sector. The Philippines is number 6 in terms of bamboo exports globally. So this is a very important industry for us. Now, the problem is reforestation. There is always an issue regarding lack of raw materials. So, as part of the national competitiveness efforts, what would be the efforts in the roadmap so that this would be addressed, so that we would be able to be more competitive in the reforestation sector? In the manufacturing sector, we are also developing engineered bamboo. So this is a possible synergy. And in Gawad Kalinga, we have a Gawad Kalinga Enchanted Farm, which will be replicated in 24 sites in the Philippines. So is there a possible synergy that we can combine the 3 sectors together so that the tourism sector will also benefit?
Well, as far as the reforestation initiatives are concerned, I'd like to point you out to the convergence initiative strategy of the national government. It is spearheaded by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And they have many nice programs, but implementation is one thing. So it's a good framework. I think if you work with them, they will work with the communities and with agricultural production technologies of the DA. What's really wanting is the involvement of the private sector to come up with innovative and creative ways to achieve your objective. And then, you're correct, we must link it with the tourism initiatives, and that has to be really studied together with the LGU. But it's a start. The German government and the Japanese government, I think, have provided some funding for these initiatives.
Just to follow up, you may be aware that there is in fact a convergence agreement between the Department of Tourism and the Department of Social Welfare on precisely addressing these types of opportunities. So what seems to me to be important is to widen the actors that are engaged in, for example, focusing on a particular aspect. And so having, for example, agriculture, which is, runs right throughout the country as a theme, tourism, which also does, and manufacturing together, I think is something that could produce a much more valuable result or outcome in terms of what we're looking for. So I think I would certainly support a broadening of the convergence approach, which will also include the private sector.
Integration is absolutely important. In the case of engineered bamboo, which the roadmap I saw, it demonstrates that how manufacturing can be integrated to agriculture. For example, manufacturer can produce the fertilizers needed by agriculture. Agriculture provides raw material, and in fact, our machinery sector can provide the needed mechanization of agriculture that will increase that productivity. Yesterday, it's interesting, I attended a meeting in NEDA where they are crafting the comprehensive, I hope I got it right, comprehensive national industrialization strategy, which links together the agri, the services, and the manufacturing sector into a broad strategy. And I think that's very important.
Mr. Dizon.
My name is Philip Dizon, American Chamber Davao. I would like to inform Mr. Batong Bakal, Chairman of the Manufacturing Committee of the American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, that considering that the power situation of the Philippines, Luzon, Visayas, is going to be deficit, as a matter of fact, come April, Luzon, I'd like to inform you that Mindanao, there's 4 power plants being built. One in Pividec, one in Malita, Davao del Sur, one in Davao itself, and one in Sarangani province, and that we have excess power amounting to 1,300 to 1,800 megawatts by year 2017. So I would like to ask your office to take a look at this possibility of looking at our part, the peaceful part of Mindanao, as a manufacturing hub for possible investors. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm a big fan, particularly of Davao. And the reason is when we do business in Davao, not only are they world-class in agriculture, but you know what? They make their own cartons, they make their own film, they make their own stickers. I mean, it's a kind of business community that has a can-do attitude. And they've shown that over the decades. And that's why I'm so pleased that that experience in Davao and that expertise is growing in Mindanao. And we'd be happy to, the committee would be happy to champion the developments in Mindanao.
And on that note, I would like to thank our panelists, Dr. Perez, Mr. Batong Bakal, Mr. Ryder, Mr. Dikino, and Mr. Razma. Thank you for joining us this morning and having this discussion with us.
Thank you to our panelists. May we request everyone to remain on stage for a photo opportunity. Thank you to our panelists and our moderator for a great discussion. And now to introduce our speaker, may we call on the President of the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Mr. Michael K. Royber.
Hello. Friends of Arangkada, distinguished guests, corporate and business association sponsors. Our third panel is entitled Keys to Unlock Investments and should be a provocative discussion of major reforms that can lead us to much higher levels of investment in the Philippines, accompanied by large-scale job creation effects. I will now invite our speaker, panel moderator, and panelists to the stage as I briefly introduce them. The forum program contains the fuller biographic information about each one of them. So, my first guest, Dr. Cielito Habito, is our speaker for this panel. Currently Chief of Party of the Trade Project of the USAID Partnership for Growth, Dr. Habito is best known as the Chief Economic Planner of the country, as a NEDA Director General in the Ramos administration, and for his weekly column on economics and trade, No Free Lunch, in the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Dr. Cielito Habito, may I ask you to the stage, please? Doctor? Now, as Vice President for External Affairs at the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, our panel moderator, Mr. Henry Schumacher, hardly needs an introduction. He's well known. Harry arrived in Manila some 37 years ago as CEO of a German multinational. He is a founder of the European Chamber and organized the Integrity Initiative jointly with the Makati Business Club. Henry is proud to be a product of the German apprenticeship program and writes regular newspaper columns on business and ASEAN. Henry, please join us. Thanks, Henry. Now to Dr. Roberto de Ocampo, OBE. He joins our Arangkada Forum for the 4th time already. Bobby is a co-vice chair of the Makati Business Club, chairman of the Veterans Bank, and a former finance secretary in the Ramos administration. Although his past speeches were rated best of forum, we feel embarrassed to impose on him again for a formal speech and look forward to his trenchant observations as a panelist. Okay, Doctor. Thank you. As the chief promoter of foreign investment in the Philippines, Department of Trade and Industry and Board of Investments, Under Secretary Ponciano Manalo knows more about the causes of the surge in FDI in the last 2 years and challenges of reaching even higher inflows. Under Secretary Tito spent much of his career in marketing multinational products and is now marketing the biggest product of his career, a revitalized Philippines. Yusek Manalo. Now, rounding out the panel is one of Mindanao's most prominent businessmen, Mr. Paul Dominguez. He has spent much of his business career in Mindanao, rising to president of C. Alcantara & Sons, from where President Ramos named him Presidential Assistant for Mindanao and Chairman of the Mindanao Development Council. Paul brings the perspective of both private and public sectors to bear in his understanding of how Mindanao can realize its immense potential. Mr. Paul Dominguez, please. Now, the JFC decided to call this panel Keys to Unlock Investments because we hope it will provide important insights into what are the key barriers to the Philippine economy achieving much higher levels of investment. Identifying the barriers must precede reforms to remove them, thereby unlocking investments. There should be no doubt that reforms in this administration are having good results in business and consumer optimism. Better laws, increased investment, more jobs, less poverty, higher credit and competitiveness ratings, less corruption, and an improved international reputation for the country. But if this administration does nothing new in its remaining 16 months and makes its reforms sustainable, is that good enough? Some reforms like K+12 will take more than a generation to produce results. Is that good enough for the unemployed, the underemployed, the overseas workers separated from their families, and the high school and college graduates who don't have jobs? Is that good enough to realize this country's enormous potential? Is it the best the Philippines can do? Clearly, the answer should be no. More can be done. There are many more reforms yet that will unlock investments and jobs. Last year, the World Bank's lead economist, Dr. Van den Brink, discussed at length what he called policy distortions that impede on job creation and the lack of structural transformation. He mentioned the lack of competition in key areas, low productivity, weak exports, underdeveloped agriculture and manufacturing, weak property rights, complex regulations, and underinvestment in health, education, and infrastructure. He cited sectoral reforms made in the Ramos administration. He called for public-private reform coalitions. Specifically, he called for reforms related to rice pricing, labor contracting, and granting incentives to business. We were inspired by his speech and the comments of the panelists who followed regarding agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism. In his opening remarks, Ebb quoted a statement of President Aquino that inclusive growth drives every initiative, every action, every decision of your government. Our forum today applauds the President's commitment. This panel can help enlighten us on how to help the President and the government to actualize their vision. I will now ask Dr. Habito to give his remarks, to be followed by the panel discussion and a brief open forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just waiting for my PowerPoint to be loaded on. Thank you. I have just a few frames to share with you, all right? Again, the topic is investments towards inclusive investments in the Philippines, and what are the reform imperatives for that? Now, let me just very quickly set the background for all of this. In 2007, the Asian Development Bank commissioned a study that tried to look what were in fact keeping the Philippines from growing as fast as its neighbors. At the time, we were still the laggard in the region. And it boiled down to four things: tight fiscal performance with poor revenues, inadequate infrastructure, especially in power, transport, and especially in Mindanao, weak investments, mainly due to governance concerns at the time, and a small and narrow industrial base. They referred to market failures, which really referred to lack of competition that led to an oligarchic economy and society. Now, the solution, obviously, was to address these constraints. And so to sustain the growth momentum, what need to be done include raising revenues, and that is obviously trying to raise the tax to GDP ratio, the revenue to GDP ratio, which in fact peaked at 17% at the time that I was in government, proudly. And Bobby De Ocampo was just reminding me that three of us in the panel belong to the Ramos administration, at which time we achieved that. We also need to boost tax collection and compliance, rationalize the incentives, and in fact undertake fundamental tax reform, including possibly lowering income tax rates. And this is now, in fact, apparently in the discussions. Infrastructure, obviously we need a massive catch-up program, catching up with our neighbors as well as catching up with our own needs. And this requires a big revenue boost and improved management of the PPP program. Investments have already improved lately because of the positive governance situation. But again, the challenge is more inclusive investments. Now, why, in fact, this modifier inclusive now? Well, I've always been saying for many years now that the Philippine growth has tended to be narrow, shallow, and hollow. Narrow because the growth has been driven primarily by a few high-growth sectors, notably finance, real estate, and of course BPOs, and just a few geographical areas, which is primarily Metro Manila and the surrounding provinces of Regions 3 and 4. The growth has been shallow as well. For example, the bulk of our exports are coming from electronics, but our number one import is also electronics. What does that tell us? The value added by the domestic economy is really very thin. And this is true for much of our export products. And therefore, there isn't very much linkage to the rest of the economy when these sectors grow. It's hollow because the jobs growth has not caught up with the output growth. Last year, in 2013, by the way, when we did 7.2% GDP growth, jobs grew by only 0.17%. Now, happily, that is changing lately, although still, the numbers have not quite caught up with the GDP growth. Now, the other important reason, obviously, is the very inequitable distribution in the Philippines. It's very glaring in this part of the world. In 2011, for example, the Forbes Asia data showed that the increase in wealth of the richest 40 Filipino families amounted to 13 billion, at a time that the total increase in our GDP was 17 billion. Now, the increased wealth of the 40 richest Filipinos is equivalent in value to 76%, of the total increase of incomes of all Filipinos combined, which is what GDP measures. So what was really alarming about that is if you look at our neighbors, look at Japan, the other end, 40 richest Japanese raised their wealth that year by 11 billion, but total Japanese incomes went up by 381 billion. And so the wealth of the richest 40 only was equivalent in value to 2.8% of the total increase in Japanese incomes. This tells us that there's something wrong about distribution in the Philippines and the need for more inclusive growth. And so the Philippines needs more investments that are in sectors or industries that are inclusive growth drivers, and I say more about that in a while, investments that are outside of the national capital region and the surrounding provinces, and investments that expand competition in the concentrated sectors, as pointed out again by the ADB. Now, I did a study for the ADB on this and identified which industries can indeed drive broad-based and therefore inclusive growth. And there's a very technical way to do this using the input-output table of the Philippines, which shows how much of the products of each industry go into the other industries of the Philippines. Mainly, the criteria for inclusiveness would be, one, the industry must generate a lot of jobs, and second, that industry must be closely interlinked with other domestic industries through what is called backward and forward linkages. It's a backward linkage if the industry itself buys a lot of the inputs from the other industries existing in the Philippines. It's a forward linkage if the products of the industry are used as an input or an intermediate input by other industries domestically. Well, what comes out from this technical analysis of the input-output table is no surprise. It's agriculture and agribusiness, tourism, manufacturing, and construction, which top that list of the most inclusive growth drivers among the sectors of the economy. So let me just very briefly, I think our projector went on the blink, but I was, in fact, the previous, okay, there you go. Agriculture and agribusiness requires fundamental institutional reforms. One of the biggest issues has always been the institution managing our agriculture. And I think we saw it from the PDAF scandal, how billions of resources, of budget having supposedly for our farmers have really gone somewhere else. So definitely things have to be fixed over there. Investment was also hampered by the uncertainty because of the 20, 30-year-old CARP. Now, we also need to foster more clustering of small producers in the face of CARP, especially because, again, export markets demand volumes, and therefore you can't just have small producers directly serving the export markets. We also have to address the high cost of domestic shipping, which has always been cited to be a barrier to further agribusiness growth. And what people have already been talking about, lasting peace in Mindanao. For tourism and allied industries, much has already been said. I'm told that I have 2 minutes left, so let me just breeze through the rest of these. Tourism, I will not read out one by one, but obviously it has been already referred to through policy reforms like open skies that still need to be addressed, improved law enforcement and peace situation in Mindanao. Again, in manufacturing, again, the previous panels already addressed many of these, so I will not repeat, except to point out again that we have a great advantage in many areas of manufacturing, those that don't even need that much energy, which continues to be an impediment. Construction, again, there's a lot of scope for that because of the massive infrastructure catch-up we need to do. And we need to have, we still have this huge unmet need, unmet demand for low to medium cost housing. Now, as we enter the ASEAN Economic Community, our remaining homework is in 3 forms: legal and policy reforms, administrative and institutional reforms, and public investments. Now, very quickly, because much of this has come up in the previous discussion already anyway, we have our outdated foreign investment restrictions, which require constitutional amendments. There's an effort to try and redefine public utilities as defined by the Public Service Act, ratify the Open Skies protocol that we have signed to in ASEAN, which is the multilateral agreement on air services, and ease cabotage restrictions, all of these being addressed by